After 9 years since it was discovered, Mario Kart Wii's hardest skip has finally been hit on 3 consecutive laps. But why did it take players 9 years to land the coveted skip, and what makes it so hard? To understand these questions, we need to go back to 2015 when the retro Sherbert skip was first found. For the first 7 years of this track's history, it didn't have a skip, with players driving the lap normally by combining wheelies with mini turbos to complete it as fast as possible. This resulted in single or fast lap times of 41 seconds and 3 lap times of just over 2 minutes. However, in 2015 that would change, as Blaze discovered that not only did Sherbert have a skip, but that it cut the fast lap time in half. At first glance, it might look like they were just jumping behind the finish line, getting picked up by Lakitu, then completing the lap. But the details are a lot more complicated, so to help understand what's going on, let's start by looking at how laps work. You'd think with how broken earlier entries in the series were that Nintendo would have learned their lesson by the time the 6th game was released. But unfortunately for them, the lap system was so broken that 21 of 32 tracks currently have skips, despite their best efforts. Every track in Mario Kart Wii is divided into invisible checkpoints that log your progress as you drive over them. The majority of these checkpoints have no bearing on your lap progress, but they do serve a purpose that we'll talk about later. The lines highlighted in green are key checkpoints that the game requires you to hit as you make your way through a track, with each being assigned a number. As you drive over them, your checkpoint value gets updated, but key checkpoints won't be active unless certain conditions are met. Let's say you're approaching the box for checkpoint 2. Before you enter it, checkpoint 1 is the only other one that's active as you've already driven through it. But as soon as you enter checkpoint 2's box, checkpoint 3 becomes active, and upon leaving the box for 2, checkpoint 1 will unload and become inactive. In order for a lap to count, the game expects your key checkpoint value to be equal to the checkpoint that precedes the finish line. So in this case, it would be looking for a value of 8. Let's say you skip from checkpoint 2 without hitting 3, then cross the finish line. In this case, the lap won't count because your key checkpoint value won't be what the game expects. And since you never hit 3, none of the checkpoints after it are ever loaded into memory, so touching 8 won't update your checkpoint value. This leaves the finish line itself, which acts as a special checkpoint with a value of 0. This means at the start of a race, the key checkpoint behind the line is active in memory, as it won't be unloaded until you reach the first one on the track. You might be thinking this means you can drive behind the finish line, set your key checkpoint, then drive back over the finish line to get credit for a lap, but the developers implemented a failsafe that stops this from working. It works by subtracting a lap when you cross into the finish line box when moving backwards, so backing over the line to the last key checkpoint won't work. But there is an exploit. If you leave the start line and enter a previous checkpoint without crossing into the finish line box, the game will update your progress value to that checkpoint instead of subtracting a lap. If you do this at the start of a race when the final key checkpoint is active, all you need to do is touch it, and you now have the prerequisites for completing a lap. This sounds straightforward enough, but it's not easy to get around the finish line. On almost every map, it's physically blocked by the terrain or has out-of-bounds sections directly beside it, and while this is true on Sherbert, it's only half true. Well, maybe a quarter. On the right, there are cliffs blocking the finish line off, and on the left, there's the water hazard. This should stop any attempt at getting around the finish line, except there's one final quirk the developers never accounted for. And that's what happens when you clip into the pole while moving at high speeds. Because if you hit it fast enough, you'll find this video's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in math, programming, AI, and data analysis. Their first principles approach helps you build a solid learning foundation so you can easily conquer concepts, with each lesson having tons of hands-on problem-solving challenges, a method proven to be 6 times more effective than watching lecture videos. The ability to play with concepts as you learn helps you develop critical thinking skills through action instead of memorization. And my favorite thing about Brilliant is that you don't need to set aside multiple hours each day to get value out of it. Instead, you can complete lessons daily that require a fraction of that time and develop a learning habit that fits your schedule. If you're just starting out, Brilliant has introductory courses that can help you develop a knowledge base. Or, if you're looking to expand into more complex topics, they have courses for that as well. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/Abyssoft or click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. And with that, let's get back to what happens when you crash into the pole on Sherbert. Blaze discovered that under certain circumstances, you could bounce off the pole and get launched into the air. The reason this happens is because when you do a wheelie and hit a wall, the game applies a force that gives you a bounce and kills your momentum, but by barely touching the wall, you get the force without the reduction in forward speed, allowing for huge air. This sounds easy enough, but the pole clip requires a very precise setup, as you first need to get into a particular position and angle. Then, you have to shroom into the pole while doing a wheelie to get launched into the air. This was only the beginning, however. In order to get enough distance to avoid the finish line box, you needed to shroom a second time while in the air to get to a checkpoint, and for reasons that weren't understood, if you landed too far left, the game wouldn't count the lap. So even if you did everything correctly, getting too close to the track or even landing on it would kill the skip. While this was a fast strategy, it did require the use of 2 mushrooms to perform, so at most it could only be used for a single lap, and in 2019, 4 years after it was discovered, a significant time save would be found. Because a tasser named Malleo looked into why attempts would randomly fail, and his discovery would blow the skip wide open. In addition to keeping track of your key checkpoints, the game also keeps track of how much of the race you've completed in the form of a percentage. When you enter any checkpoint, the game updates the percentage of the lap you've completed, so entering the first checkpoint gives you about 1%. What Malleo discovered was that if you skip more than 95% of a race, the game won't count the lap when you go over the finish line, even if you satisfied the key checkpoint requirements. And that's what was happening if you landed too far left. Your race completion was barely going over the 95% limit. To get around this problem on Sherbetland, SwareJonge figured out that if you drive ahead to the second checkpoint, then drive back into the first checkpoint, the game would update your completion percentage to 2. This is because the game sets your completion percentage based on where you enter a checkpoint, and since you are entering the first checkpoint from further in the course, it gives you enough completion credit to perform the skip and land in bounds. With this knowledge, Sware found 2 setups, a 1 shroom skip and a double shroom skip that both have you land in bounds. On both setups, you only had to drive to the final checkpoint, then cross the finish line for the lap to count, and for reasons we'll get into later, the 1 shroom skip was thought to be too hard to go for, so players opted for the 2 shroom strat instead. This strategy saved a few seconds, and new records started coming in, but the time saves weren't finished yet. Players still had a single shroom left after the skip, and they had a much better use for it than boosting around a corner. It was immediately known that going for 2 lap skips was possible, since a single shroom clip where you land in the water and respawn could be done on the second lap. The reason players weren't doing this previously was because landing in the water consumed your remaining shrooms, but this new first lap setup where you land in bounds changed that. Over the next few months, the 3 lap time was lowered considerably, dropping it from a 140, the first record set with the inbounds double shroom strat, all the way down to a low 112. This isn't to mention how hard the strat was. From the time it was discovered in 2019 through to 2022, the record only dropped 11 times. Getting 1 clip was hard enough, but getting a second one in the same run was incredibly difficult. But in 2024, something happened that changed the entire landscape of the track. When you clip into the pole, lots of different things can happen, from bouncing off into the water, to getting launched up high for the skip, or even failing to hit it entirely. It wasn't understood why this was happening when it was first discovered, and the inconsistency with clipping the pole was why only a few runs had ever been completed with 2 out of 3 lap skips. But a tasser named Justin looked into why this was happening, and he finally figured out what was going on. When you change position in Mario Kart Wii, the game doesn't move you in one continuous movement. Instead, it jumps you from one position to another each frame, which is called quantized movement. When it comes to the pole clip, the position you need to hit it from is so precise that if there's any variation in where you start moving from, or your speed when moving, the clip is likely to fail. Since due to the quantized movement, your position would be different enough that it would miss the sweet spot on the pole. This is why the single shroom strat that Sware posted in 2019 hadn't been used. It was thought to be so precise that it wasn't worth going for. And that appeared to be true, because after 5 years of attempts, no one had hit it a single time. But in August of this year, that was about to change. Using task tools, Justin created a ghost that was optimized for forward movement so that it would always get the 1 shroom clip. By playing against this ghost, players could get an easier clip, as they could align with it to ensure their position was correct, leaving only the wheelie and mushroom inputs to worry about. It's worth mentioning mentioning that some Mario Kart communities ban playing against ghosts created with tasks as they think it makes the game too easy. But Mario Kart Wii have never banned this practice and used task ghosts on lots of skips, so let me know what you think about it down below. On Sherbet Land, using an alignment ghost may sound like it makes the skip free, but that was far from the truth, as the wheelie and shroom still required frame-perfect inputs, and that's only to make the clip happen. Let's assume you get the high clip, which is what runners call the pole clip that sends you into the air. Your inputs aren't finished yet. Depending on how you're oriented, upon landing, you need to do a frame-perfect hop, or in rare cases, a frame-perfect nosedive. This was a huge wall for successful attempts, and even if you did everything perfect, the game would sometimes kill your attempt, as you could still land too far to the left, which triggers the 95% rule. But if everything went in your favor, you could use one shroom and land in bounds, with Zoren being the first person to hit it. However, the success rate was so low that top players were only getting 1 or 2 hits an hour, meaning this wasn't even close to getting a 3 out of 3 in the same race. Another tasker named Shadow would look at improving the consistency, and he settled on a ghost that took a closer position to the pole than Justin's did. He also changed the execution a bit, requiring you to wheelie, then let go of a standstill mini turbo on the same frame, which gives you a micro bounce. After the bounce, you have a small frame window to hit the shroom instead of it being frame perfect, with Shadow's clip being a bit more consistent if you did the rest of the setup correctly. It came with a drawback, however. Despite making the clip more consistent, the landing became a lot harder as it launched you at varying heights, so frame perfect nosedives and hops became a must on a lot of landings. In an effort to optimize this setup, Zoren would edit the ghost so you shroom then wheelie, as well as adjusting the distance so it was somewhere between Justin's first ghost and Shadow's second. With these changes, the landing became easier, but hitting the clip took a drop in consistency, with top runner Logan describing multiple parts of this setup as feeling out of your control. That was 3 bowls of porridge for speedrunners, and none of them were just right. So Zoren made what they called the Goldilocks ghost, which combined pieces of each setup. It had Shadow's frame-perfect wheelie into mushroom inputs, but with a position that was similar to Justin's ghost. If you did this setup correctly, there was a 7-frame window where you could shroom and a good clip would occur, with the frame-perfect hop or nosedive being eliminated from the landing if you do the shroom on a later frame in the window. This was a big improvement, as the previous setup had a hit rate of once or twice an hour, but the Goldilocks ghost had a much higher success rate, with Logan's total successful clips going from 10 to 46 in his first stream. This made players very optimistic that a 3 out of 3 could be performed, and 2 strategies developed. One where you do the single shroom clip that lands inbounds on the first 2 laps, then do the safer respawn strat on the third, and another where you go for the fastest time possible by doing the inbound strat on all 3 laps. On top of this, players use a metronome to help make their inputs more consistent once in position, which is controversial in some communities, and I'd love to know what you think about it down below. But with the strats decided, the race was on for who would hit it first, and the players grinding the most attempts were Logan and Zoren, with Logan going for the safer strat and Zoren opting to go for the fastest. Zoren had a close attempt where he landed the first 2 skips but failed on the third, and with the pressure on, Logan would get his own shot at the first 3 out of 3. Zoren got another chance at a 3rd lap skip, but unfortunately it failed, and the only proof we have of it is this heavily redacted screenshot. Feeling the pressure, Logan would get another chance. And then another.
Dude, how? Oh my god. How did I fail it? That was perfect.
Both players were so close, but the game didn't want to go down without a fight, and just 10 minutes after his last failed attempt, Logan got another shot.
Yes! Yes, dude! Oh my goodness. Wait a minute. Go, 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 go! Oh, still, that's unbelievable. Oh my god.
And with that, Logan became the first person in history to hit the hardest skip Mario Kart Wii has ever seen. But he wasn't done there. His run was barely above 1 minute, and with a small optimization, he could break the sub-minute barrier. And the next day, he did this.
Huh. Yo. It's still lit.
With that, not only had Logan hit the first 3 out of 3, but he was the first person to beat the track in under a minute. But this isn't where the story ends. While Logan was busy setting records, Zoren was still grinding the harder strategy, and just before this video released, he nailed the 3rd lap inbound skip. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next exciting episode of Abyssoft Z.